Welcome back. We're discussing the federal housing advocate and concerns about discrimination within the housing market. And joining me to have that discussion is Shawn Taylor, Senior Features Editor at the C2C Journal. Thanks again, Peter. So just before commercial break, we were discussing how the FHA, the Federal Housing Advocate, is advocating for policies which would essentially bring in, some kind of communistic, socialistic program that the government will own housing to put an end to privately owned housing or housing that is for profit. You're right. Developers, I'm sure, are scratching their heads saying, are you kidding me? Why would that be so devastating to Canada?
Well, the main problem behind Canada's housing supply is beyond the need for the labor supply that you need to put up the houses is capital, right? Where is the money coming from to put up the houses? Canada has a lot of land. Whether it's zoned or not is we can debate, but certainly Canada is a country rich in space. So the main obstacle is putting up houses on that space, and the biggest obstacle is capital. Where are you going to get the money to do it? The federal government certainly has shown no compunction to spend a lot of money on a lot of things, from dental care to pharmacare, et cetera. But do we really have the trillions that is going to be required to put up all those millions of houses that we need? So the private sector is absolutely essential. We shouldn't even be debating this, whether we need the private sector involved in the housing market or not. And so, that just speaks to the lunacy coming out of the federal housing advocate, that there's something wrong about making a profit putting up or renting houses. We need that profit. That's the motivation for housing supply.
Now, I suspect that the impetus, if you will, for suggesting this program that the FHA did is because they declare that there is racial discrimination in the housing market in Canada. Is this the case? Do we have racial discrimination in housing?
Well, that's one of the things. The housing advocate has a bunch of things she's fixated on. One of them is financialization. The other is this notion that housing is a right in Canada, which it is not, but they repeatedly claim. And the other is that, as you mentioned, that the housing market is full of racial discrimination, which is another reason why the government has to get involved. Like the other fixations of the federal housing advocate, this one fails on close examination. But to engage with your question, yes, the housing advocate claims that Canada's housing market is racist. And so that the story we're talking about that I wrote, that was sort of the motivation. Here's a claim. They claim that we need government involvement because the housing market is racist. And so I decided to look into it. And it turns out StatsCan has quite a bit of data on housing ownership, housing renters by race. Mm-hmm. And so you can test the contention. And sure enough, if you look at the data, there is a housing ownership is differentiated by race.
Okay. So I guess my next question is a little closer. Yeah, which cultures and races then are predominantly homeowners versus those who are not?
So there is a clear racial hierarchy of home ownership, et cetera. And what you find is at the top is Chinese Canadians, Asian Canadians, Japanese Canadians. Then in the middle, you find whites, and then at the bottom, you tend to find blacks and Latin Americans. So prima facie, there is a separation of how home ownership stats by race, but does that mean that the housing market is racist? Well, if you take the standard Canada is racist narrative, it generally holds that whites are somehow using their power to discriminate against blacks or other visible minorities. But that argument doesn't hold if it turns out that Asians are far and away at the top of the leaderboard, if you will. How is it possible that whites are fixing the system to their own benefit and they end up right in the middle? So that it just doesn't seem, then you start to think, well, there must be other reasons going on here that explain this racial hierarchy beyond systemic racism. Something else must be going on.
Well, certainly. And in the next segment, I want to unpack some more of that metadata and see what exactly is happening. One thing that comes to mind is immigrants tend to want home ownership. A lot of them come from countries where maybe home ownership was verboten or there was socialism and communism. So therefore, when they get to a new place, they immediately say, you must own land, we must settle in and make roots. We're going to pick up this discussion in just a few moments.